Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. I'm Brian Parks, and in this video, I want to show some improvements that I've made to the WordPress local dev environment using Docker that I showed last week. So I actually consider this to be, maybe the ultimate WordPress dev environment. So hopefully you do as well. But let's start off with kind of a quick recap of what I did last week. And then I'll get into some adjustments that I've made and some additional adjustments that I'm still working on. So some things that you might want to try out, but that I haven't quite gotten to a point where I really like it and can share it in video. So first off, we're using Docker Compose. My recommendation is that you use Docker Compose because there are some environment variables that need to be set for the Docker container to work properly, and some things that if you weren't using something like Docker Compose, you would end up having to run from the command line every single time you needed to spin up your Docker container. And that would just be a pain. And it's a lot easier to, for instance, just do Docker Compose up in order to get everything running. So to start with, let's just quickly review what I have so far. So I have my Docker Compose file. We are using the WordPress image. I'm using basically the latest and greatest WordPress. They do have a variant to use PHP 8. The default variant uses PHP 7.4, I believe. That's sufficient for me. I am mapping the container's port 80 to my localhost port 8080. And because I'm running on Windows and using the Windows subsystem for Linux backend, and my MySQL server is running on my Windows machine, I didn't want to run another MySQL instance inside Docker and have it running on my local machine. That didn't make sense to have it running twice. We're just going to use the host machine's MySQL instance. So for WordPress DB host, we have host.docker.internal. Host.docker.internal is a host name provided by Docker that allows containers to talk to the host machine. And DB user, DB password, and then the database name that we'll be using is called WP demo. We're mapping a couple volumes. This WordPress one is something that it's a named volume, so that whenever I destroy the container via something like Docker Compose down, it doesn't wipe away my WordPress install. This is helpful if you have a brand new WordPress install and you want to, say, install plugins or themes or that sort of thing. They'll stay around. As we'll see in another part of this video, there's actually a slight tweak I want to make to that to make this just a little bit better. And then in this case, I said, you know what, I'm going to have a custom theme. I have this file, this folder structure, themes, my custom theme. And of course I created, the bare minimum to create a theme. I have the theme name, my custom theme, and it uses the 2021 theme as its template. This allows me to do my development locally using Visual Studio Code, and that's mounted into the container so that I can actually see it running on WordPress. So, and I could do the same thing for plugins. I don't have any custom plugins run. If you have a bunch of extra plugins that you wanted to use, you could do something like plugins map to, what would it be, var www html WP content plugins. That's if you had all of your plugins running locally. I don't actually recommend that because, especially the way I have it set up, this is actually on my Windows machine. This is not in Windows subsystem for Linux land. So there is actually some performance degradation going across the virtualization layers. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this strategy. And to that end, we'll actually talk about another tweak that I want to make in the future. Unfortunately, that's one of the ones that I don't have quite solidified right now. Something to look forward to for the future. So I don't have any plugins, so I'm just going to leave that blank, and we'll just have all the plugins that show up on this volume. And then, of course, because we're using a named volume there, we have to list it down in this volumes section. Okay, so a couple improvements that I want to make. One, if we actually Docker compose run, or Docker compose, let's do up. Some of these containers might actually be running. That's pretty cool. It looks like Docker isn't actually running. So let's go ahead and make sure Docker is started. It's running. So let's just restart. Let's just restart Docker. Yeah, it looks like it's not actually running very well. Okay, so yeah. Give me just a second to get this spun up again. Backend is starting. I was having some issues with this earlier in today, so I apologize for that. But Docker Engine is starting, and in just a minute here, we should be back up and running. There we go. Okay. Now Docker ps-all shows me that I have 2 containers, neither of which are running. Now, if I do Docker compose up, there we go, creating, and there we go. The container is up and running. So let's open up a new window, localhost 8080, and we should get WordPress spun up. Yep, there we go. Here's my WordPress site. Now let's go ahead and log in. So in order to log in, wp login.php. Okay, this actually works, but in some scenarios you might have a case where WordPress logins or admin logins are required to go over HTTPS. So there's an easy way to fix this. This has happened on occasion with kind of existing WordPress sites. So you might have a plugin that that kind of forces HTTPS WordPress logins. But we can go over to the Docker compose file, and we can actually create additional config entries. So if we need to do some kind of manual configuration of this is like if we wanted to change wp config.php, this is how we do it. So the key in the Docker compose file is WordPress config extra. And this is going to take advantage of a special YAML feature that allows us to basically have a block of multiple lines, all of which are the value of the key. So I'm going to hit tab under there. And the site that I'm copying this from, which if I can remember, I'll leave a link down in the description to it. Lots of good stuff on this particular page about various customizations and tweaks you can do with this particular Docker container. But it shows some comments. I'll just type the necessary PHP code. And if you hear noise in the background, that's just my cat jumping around some boxes. And typing on my keyboard. That's cool. All right. So we'll do define force SSL admin and false. Basically what this does is it says we don't need to force SSL in order to get to the admin side. So I'm actually curious. Again, I'm not a WordPress developer, but this is something that kind of interests me from a orchestration perspective. So if I go to WP admin, even that works. So it must be just some environments might have that configured to require SSL to get to the admin console. This installation, for whatever reason, does not. Again, this was reported to me by some people who were using the video. So this is some feedback I got on the video. Sorry, the cat's tail just got in the way there. Okay, so this is not strictly necessary, but I am going to make this tweak to the WP config. So because of the way this container works, we actually need to manually remove the WP config file. The way we do that is basically run a command. Sorry, I have my notes on my phone here. To run a command in the container and the easiest way to do that is Docker compose. You can do it just with Docker. You can do Docker exec-it, but then you have to know, well, I guess it shows right here, WP in Docker _WordPress, the name of the container. But it's a lot easier to just do Docker compose exec, the name of the container within the Docker compose file, or the name of the service, I guess, more accurately. So it's just WordPress. And then the command we want to run, which is rm wp-config.php. So we'll do that. And in just a second, now it's removed the that config file. The reason this works is because even though I hit Control-C on Docker Compose up, the container is still running. So if I were to do Docker ps dash, well, I'll just do Docker ps. Thought it was running. It might just quickly spin up the file system just enough to do the removal to execute that command, and then shut it back down again. Yeah, you can see status exited 0 about a minute ago. So it created 5 minutes ago, but we removed that command, that file. So it spun up and then spun back down. Okay, so now we can do Docker compose up again. And we should actually see I thought we would see a note that that it's creating a new WP config.php. I don't see that in the logs, but it should have recreated the WP config.php file, and we should be good to go. Now, obviously, in our situation, we didn't actually need to make that change, but it's good to know how to make that change in case you need to manually add things to that WP config file. Now, the other thing that you might have to do, especially if you're using this for a site that already exists and you're building from a database backup, is so here's my WP demo database. Go to WP options, go to data. This first entry in this table, this WP options table, is site URL. And you'll notice that it's http://localhost 8080. This is good in my case because that is the URL to get to my site. But if you're spinning up your local environment from a database backup of a live site, this value is going to be the URL of your live site and probably this home URL as well. So what you'll want to do is just edit it. And I apologize if it's tiny on this screen. I don't know that there's a way I can bump up this bump up the font size on this screen. But it's actually, I might have a tool that does this. No. There we go. Okay, well, let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so you can see site URL, those settings are what you want to change. So now finally, I did mention there were a couple things that I wanted to do that I just haven't quite figured out yet in a way that's easily digestible here. So one thing is how to kind of have what I want to do is have a manifest of plugins so that you don't have to have all your plugins in this directory, but you also don't have to like go through the UI, go through the WordPress UI and manually install every single plugin that you're actually using. And I did find there's something called wpackagist. So if you've used Composer before for general PHP development, you might be familiar with the website Packagist, which is the main Composer kind of archive for PHP libraries. Wpackagist is the same thing except for WordPress plugins and themes. And what it does is if you install a theme, it'll install it to, let's bump this up as well, something wpackagist theme, and then the name of the theme. And for plugins, it's wpackagist-plugin, and then the name of the WordPress plugin. And that's fine, except then you have to, then what you're doing is you have these plugins downloaded to something like vendor / wpackagist plugin / the name of the plugin. And then you have to map that directory to WP content plugins and WP content themes for themes as well. That seems like a bit of a pain, and I haven't quite gotten that figured out just right. And the other thing is, how does this work for existing sites, right? So you have an existing site, you have a bunch of plugins. What I'd really like to do is just scan those plugins and either just get an entire list of the plugins that are there and their versions and kind of automatically create this Composer file if that's the best way to go. Or ideally figure out what the top level plugins are, or the plugins that are actually used by WordPress versus dependent plugins, right? So kind of find the roots of the dependency tree and put those into Composer, because Composer will take care of figuring out what additional dependencies are needed in order to install certain plugins. I hope. I think at least. I think that's part of the goal of this. So that's something that I really want to look into and kind of get a little bit better tooling around this, so that you can also have the custom plugins that you need for your particular site and the plugins that are just installed from the WordPress plugin repository. The other thing that I want to address And this is, again, a piece of feedback that I got on the video. Not everybody who's working with WordPress is a WordPress developer or is a PHP developer. Some people are like site builders, but there could be teams of site builders, teams of people working on managing pages. So wouldn't it be nice if they could all work on their own pages, but track them in like a Git repository, the same way that the WordPress developers are tracking their code changes? Now, the problem is that WordPress, working really closely with MySQL, all of that stuff is stored in the database. And databases are notoriously difficult to version. Version control for databases, it does exist. There are companies out there doing database version control, but it doesn't work the same way as code version control. It just doesn't, because the data is just a different animal. But I've got a couple ideas around that, and I'm playing around with some of them. You'll probably see some of that on the channel in a little bit here. I've got a bit of a project that I'm working on that I think will solve the problem. Hopefully will at least provide a partial solution to the problem, and maybe be interesting enough that it'll create a community-driven open source project around it. But that's another thing I'm working on solving. So in this video, we talked about the base WordPress install using Docker. We talked about a couple improvements. One, doing custom changes to the WP config file, and another changing the root URL, the site URL. And then there are a couple things that are out on the horizon. One being, how do we track the data that's being edited to create the content of the WordPress site, and how do we track plugins, and how can we kind of automate and orchestrate that piece. Yeah, so hopefully you found this interesting. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. This is something that is definitely interesting to me, and there are definitely going to be future videos on this. So definitely hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when new videos come out. If you're interested in more PHP development style videos, there will be more of them coming out. Most of this channel is about development, so this video specifically is actually kind of a deviation, but a fun deviation. And I really enjoy having a variety of content on my channel. So go ahead and subscribe, click that notification bell, and be sure to comment down below or on any of my videos, really, with suggestions for future topics, questions that you have that you want me to do additional deep dive videos on, or quick, simple questions. I'll even respond on that video. I really enjoy having a vibrant community around this stuff. So any chance I get to respond to a question, I will take that opportunity. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope to see you in future videos. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Have a great day.